Yokai Douchuuki is a big moment for the PC Engine. It's the first third-party game on the system. And naturally, it comes to us from arcade powerhouse Namco. Pretty much the biggest video game company in Japan to not have their own game console. Namco getting on board with the PC Engine was a big deal, and they're going to be one of the major contributors to the HuCard format. They wind up publishing roughly 10% of all HuCard games. However, they also don't publish anything for the PC Engine's other formats. And so, as a company, they're pretty far down the list for total number of PC Engine releases. Of course, Namco came to the PC Engine under the heading of Namcot, their home division in the 1980s. While there are a few theories around, nobody's really sure where the T at the end of Namco comes from. Even Namco doesn't know at this point. The first game that they chose to release on the PC Engine was a port of their arcade hit Yokai Douchuuki, or Monster Travelogue if you want to translate it very literally. The arcade game was notable for being one of the first titles to be goal-orientated instead of based on score, its unique themes, and its absolutely insane difficulty. This PC Engine port actually retains that insane difficulty. I've got a lot of footage of the first stage. The plot of the game is Todorosuke is a real jerk of a kid. So much of a jerk that a god sends him to hell. He has to make his way through the afterlife and face judgment there if he wants to return to Earth. But the god wasn't totally cruel. He gives Todorosuke the ability to fire telekinetic bullets. All he has to do is make his way through 5 stages of traditional monsters, Japanese folklore, and King Enma weighing his soul. Todorosuke has a life bar that goes down every time he gets hit, but he only has 1 life. That life bar runs out and it's game over. And there are no continues. The arcade version actually had continues, so this is one area where the PC Engine is significantly crueler. Perhaps they did that because the game's only about 15 to 20 minutes long straight through, if you can somehow survive. When you're controlling Todorosuke, button 1 jumps, button 2 shoots, these actions are a little bit more complicated than that. Pressing down charges up a super shot, but this quickly builds and eventually overwhelms Todorosuke, and he'll become stunned for a few seconds. So you have to charge up and fire before that happens. And for jumping, well, he can bounce off a lot of enemies' heads. Not all of them. Some will hurt him, some he squishes flat, but there are plenty that you can bounce on, and it's an important technique for 2 reasons. First, you can reach out-of-the-way items and places. Second, and the important one, is that how many enemies you defeat determines what ending you get. Todorosuke has a piety score that the game keeps track of. Most of it only builds on level 5, but there are actions you can take throughout the game that will increase or decrease it. If you want the best ending, you're going to make the game extra hard on yourself. There's a few different things you can collect on the way, and the most common is money. There's a few shops you'll encounter where you can buy things to restore your health, or purchase some permanent power-ups. Flippers that improve your movement speed in water, which you will absolutely need before you reach stage 3, and a drink that will make Todorosuke run faster and jump higher. There are also power-ups for his telekinetic bullets. Every level of this lets you shoot an additional bullet. So when you start out the game, you can only fire 1 at a time, but get the upgrade and you can shoot 2, 3, or 4. The limitation on bullets is harsher than it sounds, because the bullet shoots out and then comes back, because sometimes it just orbits around Todorosuke instead of returning to him. There are 2 pretty much required items that will restore Todorosuke's health when the bar runs out, though one of them you might want to hand over to a friendly cat or dog you meet on the way, because if you do feed them, then they'll go through the stage with you, defeating enemies on the way. There are also 3 special orbs that you have to obtain on stage 4 by defeating bosses you locate throughout the level. Something carried over from the arcade game are methods to prevent the player from idling in one spot. If you stand still too long, things start coming at you. Initially, frogs just drop from the top of the screen. Eventually, you'll get invincible monsters that will kill you in one hit, chasing you down. Complicating things is that these events are on a timer, so they'll occur more quickly if you stand still, but they'll still occur as you play. At the end of Stage 1, and possibly on Stage 2, you'll encounter a boss that's a demon that demands all of your money and possessions. If you turn it over, you still get attacked. The way these boss fights work is that Torosuke retreats to a nearby shrine and prays, while a spirit emerges to defend him. While this is happening, you're controlling the spirit, and you can fire attacks with button 2 that act as homing missiles. They don't target enemies especially well, unfortunately. New enemies continuously spawn in, but your real target is the big demon himself. He'll screen himself with that giant club, so you can't approach closer than that without getting severely hurt. So instead, you'll want to sit close to it and hopefully get enough shots in to take him out. A pseudo-boss awaits you toward the end of Stage 5, where if you do things incorrectly, you'll run into a false Buddha who will start asking you morality questions, but these will quickly turn into nonsense, and he never stops asking questions. The way to get around the false Buddha is found on Stage 2, so if you miss that, you won't be able to complete the game. Yokai Douchuuki happens to be the first instance of 16-bit nudity we're going to get on the PC Engine, something that there is going to be a surprising amount of when we get to the later days of the system. You only get a very brief flash of it. It occurs at a point that I couldn't reach during my play session. There's a strip show that Torosuke can watch where you just get flashes of what's happening. That's a new addition for the PC Engine. It wasn't in the arcade version. A weird addition on the PC Engine is that there are a bunch of developer messages hidden in the game. If you hold down button 1, 2, select, and then press run when you're on the title screen, then you get to a code entry page. The codes are actually a relatively new discovery. In fact, so new that they were found 3 days after I posted my video on the Famicom version of this game. Besides the messages, there's also a couple of tricks you can do here, including a bizarre one where you make the game play in a 4-way split screen. Sadly, not 4-player. You control all of them simultaneously. Like I mentioned, there was a Famicom version as well, and that was released about 4 months after the PC Engine version. The Famicom one is actually a little bit closer to the arcade in terms of level layout. It also adds a bunch of new events, and more easily lays out how the scoring works for the ending. It creates the weird situation where the Famicom version is the home version that most Japanese players prefer. I find that Yokai Douchuuki is one of those games that gains a lot of its difficulty through obscurity. This is a game that's going to be pretty unfair. It definitely doesn't help that Torosuke is awfully slippery. You'll be taking a lot bigger steps than you intend to, and that makes the platforming trickier than you'd expect. At the same time though, I kinda like the game just for how outrageous it is. Yokai Douchuuki is a game that puts an absurd challenge in front of the player, and then wants you to just go for it. It's definitely not a game for everyone. And I'd say if you don't like the PC Engine version, you should still try the Famicom version. This PC Engine version, it's only for those who want the extreme challenge.